Hey everyone, Genome here, coming at you with yet another contest entry video. Well, today's video is going to be for Comic Spectre's 300 subscriber appreciation contest. So first of all, let me say congrats to you for hitting that great milestone. I know subs are pretty hard to get for some people in the community, so yeah, you've done obviously very well in that regard. So without further ado, let's kind of go over a little bit of what the stipulations were, or the criteria for the contest are. It's really simple, actually. You just got to pick out your 5 favorite comic books and then say a little something about them, say why they're your favorite, whatever. So I went ahead and picked out a selection that I think could pretty much be construed as my favorites, but you know, that's open to interpretation at times. You know, it changes from week to week sometimes. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into them. First off, the Punisher War Journal number 2. The reason why this one is on the list is it's pretty much the comic that got me into collecting comics. I started reading that back in middle school. A buddy of mine had it, and I had some of the comic books in the past, but I didn't really think anything of them. I didn't collect them. There's things that had gathered around me through either gifts or whatever. You know, pump 8 gallons of gas to get a free comic book kind of thing, right? So a buddy of mine at school had this, and he was reading it, and it's like, well, I want to read that too, and I was hooked. I read it, and I was freaking hooked. It's like, this is a hero I can understand. You know, he wasn't some cornball like Superman or Spider-Man, whatever. This guy means business, man. He's got real motivation, and he's got a plan. He's a man with a plan, right? So this was during the heyday of the Jim Lee, Carl Potts time that they worked on the War Journal together. So yeah, obviously the art was amazing. The story was freaking phenomenal. This is actually a 2-parter, but this is the original. This is the one that really got me into collecting, so I had to put it in my top 5. And overall, it's just a great issue. Next up, we're going to have West Coast Avengers 16, and this is my reader copy. This, I actually did a video on it quite a while ago, basically highlighting it as the very first comic book I ever collected, or ever got. Now, that's probably not exactly true, because I believe like the He-Man toys and some of the Transformer toys or whatever, or maybe even G.I. Joes way back in the early 80s, whatever, probably came with a little comic book. So I guess those would be technically my first, but I don't remember any of those. I don't remember anything about them, and I certainly don't have them anymore. So this will have to be it. I got this actually as, it was inside of a giant Easter egg, like a big plastic Easter egg. It was like a pre-Loot Crate, you know, that some friends of my parents gave us for Easter. And you know, there's candy and other little toys in there, but this was also in there. And I read it and reread it and reread it, and actually this one's kind of interesting as far as like for some of my age group. This is really not that great a comic in the fact that it's almost all, you know, story. There's not, I mean, there's action, there's some action in here, of course, like every comic, but you know, it's not wall-to-wall action. And you know, these are like B-list villains in here. Was it Tiger Shark and Whirlwind? So, but once again, I went more in depth in this one in my previous video. But like I said, this is definitely a reader copy. The cover and the interior of the book have long since parted ways, and of course it's completely destroyed. I keep it around just because, you know, it's a piece of memorabilia from my past. So, great book, first official comic book that I still have. Next up, we have Captain America number 378. This one gets in on virtue of actually 2 different things. First of all, it's part of probably my favorite story arc of all time in comics, the Streets of Poison story arc, which if you haven't read it, get out there and do so. It's you can still buy it on the cheap. It's not expensive or anything, but it's just such a good storyline. I think it's what, 7 issues, something like that. It's a lot, and it's a hero mashup. It's got everybody, and villain mashup. It's got quite a few villains. We're talking like Bullseye's in there, Crossbone's in there, Black Widow's in there, Diamondback is in there, Red Skull's in there, Kingpin's in there. You know, the list goes on and on. Daredevil's in there. Forgot about that one. So yeah, it's a big hero mashup. But what makes the issue so special is just the finale of it. And at the end, Captain America is given a choice. Basically, the premise of the whole story arc, which I don't want to spoil it. Spoiler alert. And I'll put a timestamp down at the bottom, so if you don't want to be spoiled by it, you won't see it. But basically, Cap is, there's an explosion at a drug warehouse that he's in, trying to break things up, and his blood is completely contaminated with crystal meth, basically. So the only way they figured to get it out of his system is to give him a blood transfusion, because he's going off the wall, man. He's hyped. Man, this guy is out there kicking everyone's ass. He's not thinking clear. He's attacking friend and foe. So they get him in there. They do blood transfusion, but what that does is actually completely strips the super soldier serum from his body. It's no longer there. So he is, you know, John Q. Public, everyday regular human being. Now, of course, he's still at peak physical fitness, but he's not really metahuman anymore. You know, he's one of the guys, and it even makes mention that during a fight inside that he's getting winded. He's not used to that. But at the end, you know, he kind of overcomes, you know, despite having lost the serum. And at the very last, one of the last panels, is Hank Pym has figured out a way to filter out the crystal meth particles at the bloodstream, or his super soldier serum blood, and reintroduce it to his body, so basically making him full-fledged Captain America again. Well, Cap, upon reflection, he tells Henry, I don't want it. He says, you know, Captain America is not a drug, it's an ideal, it's a person, it's me. And, you know, you could have given that serum to about anybody, really. He doesn't say all this, but this is what it comes across as. And they wouldn't have become what I am. And, you know, he's not being vainglorious about it. That's just, you know, the fact of the matter. He says, you know, and if I can't say no to drugs, who can? So the last panel is him pushing the cure away and going about his business as regular old human Cap. So such a great wrap up to the story arc. It's such a great way of keeping in character of Cap. You know, once again, later on, he gets it back through kind of Deus Ex Machina, but whatever, we'll skip past all that. But it was just a great wrap up to a great story arc. Now, the other great thing about this book is how I actually got that. I must have 7 or 8 copies of this book, and the reason is because a buddy of mine were down at a dollar store. I can't remember what we were buying, just, you know, some knickknacks or whatever. This is back in the 80s, and they had this comic. Well, we had enough. We bought like one each or whatever, and it's like, they have a bunch more, and we think this is going to be really valuable, you know, because even back then, I think we knew who Ron Lim was and in the appreciation of comics. So we made a kind of a weird deal with the proprietor of the place, or the manager of the place, and we told her, it was like, look, we'll clean the store up if we can get some more store credits. And she let us, man. We cleaned that place for hours. They had all kinds of junk underneath the shelves and all that, and it needed a good spiffy once over, and she probably wanted to get rid of us. So she's like, all right, here you go. I'll give you all, you know, $5 in store credit each. Just go ahead and clean out whatever. So we did that, and that's how I got so many copies of this issue. So early speculation and trading it for work, but it makes it one of my favorites. So next up, we got my original Grail, my beacon of light, my reason for being in comics. Punisher #1, Volume 2, #1. This comic was hard to get back in the day. People don't realize is back in the late 80s, especially, and then early 90s, you know, there was no internet really to speak of. There was no ordering online. We had a very small network of LCSs. I lived in Orlando at the time, so there was, you know, quite a few shops, but it wasn't as easy as it is nowadays to find what you wanted. So there was very limited copies of this floating around as it was, and he was a red hot character. I mean, everything of his was just ridiculously expensive. I think this book, when I bought it, was around $50. You know, what's it go for now? $10, $12 or something? I don't know what it goes for nowadays, but it was hard to get a hold of, and I saved and I saved and I saved. And now, mind you, I collected everything back then, so it was hard to keep money in my pocket, you know, between basketball cards, football cards, baseball cards, hockey cards. I collected any kind of card there was. Comics. You know, money burned a hole really fast. And so I had to save up for this, and I saved and I saved and I saved, and I got it. And I remember I had to go to an LCS, and he actually had to make some calls to get it in his shop, because it was not easy commodity to get a hold of back then. And it sounds ridiculous. I'm sure there's plenty of copies of it floating around, but once again, like I said, it was the small network back then, which made things so special. So, but anyway, this is my Grail. You know, I would say it's probably my top wanted book of all time. And I got it. It was very, very endorphin-inducing when I got it, and I read it cover to cover, of course. You know, the art's nothing special. The book itself is nothing special, other than, you know, laying down some groundwork for what he is and what he does. But, you know, it just meant a lot to me. All right, let's move on to what is probably my most, I don't know about shocking, but my most moments ever in a comic store. And I walked in, and of course, like I said, there wasn't a whole lot of comic news out there. You know, I mean, you had a couple magazines that would, I wish I didn't subscribe to. I had some Wizard magazines, but whatever, but you didn't really know what was up and coming unless the LCS guy told you about it, really. And I walked in the comic store one day, and this was on the shelf. That's right, folks. Aliens vs. Predator 1. Now, for those of you who know me in real life will know that that's two of my favorite movies of all time, Aliens and Predator. So when I saw this mashup in Dark Horse, no less, which I collected a lot of Dark Horse back then, which I knew was great, I was floored. I mean, look at the cover. This cover is sensational. Every cover in this whole run was sensational. And man, the hype was real, so I bought that up like that. What was this back then? $2.50. So it was a pretty expensive book back then, but you know, it's nothing to worry about. Upon reflection, I wish I would have got more of them, so I have some near-mint issues, because I read these so many times. It was so bad that all 4 of these, and there's actually a 0 cover too, which most people don't know about. Hold on. It was kind of a limited release. Excuse the packaging. Stuck in a big bag. That's actually a precursor story. It's all done in black and white, as Dark Horse was wont to do back then. But in fact, let me grab the other ones. Sorry. So you get, you know, 1. You got 2. And I'm sorry about the lighting. I killed the lighting a little bit so it wouldn't get so much glare. You know, 3. This is all done by Phil Norwood. All of these. I'm gonna turn a little bit so you can see them a little better. And the 4th and final one. These little things up here are basically alien tails, dagger-like, surrounded by them. But man, I saw this book, I was floored, bought it up, loved it, salivated for the next ones to come out. And I actually had all these hanging on my wall as a teenager. Up in, you know, I put them in sleeves and boards and tacked them to my wall from my bed. I loved them so much. And if you ever got into them, the story is amazing. This is not just a gimmick book. The writing is top-notch. This is one of the few times, like, you know, usually we get like into an alien predator thing that you don't want to know about. You don't care about the human side of things. It really, it takes away from the book usually, you know. It feels like filler. In this one, the humans are written so well and the characters are written so well that they're not. I mean, they're basically as enjoyable as the protagonists for the most part. It seems like a real scenario. So, well, if you consider interstellar alien battles a real scenario, but I mean, it's just so cool how it lines up, and the mythos is expanded upon, and I don't know. It was an amazing comic, and definitely in the top 5 all time for me. So there you go. There's my top 5. Hopefully that wasn't too long and rambling for you, but if anyone else has watched my videos, they know how I roll. So there it is. So get over to Comic Spectre's site or his page if you haven't already. Sub up to it. Give him a watch. Give him some support, because he's obviously giving back to the community. Comic Spectre, you keep up the good work. Alright, well, I'm going to wrap this up now. I got another video to shoot, and the day is getting short. So until next time, this is Genome and his 5 favorite comic books.